Hey gang, it's Matt from The Inner Nerd, and in this video I'm going to take a simple approach to what sometimes can be an overwhelmingly complex subject, weathering. So join me and see how I painted and then weathered this model using only 3 colours, proving that you don't need much to get something looking like this. I'll be using the Royce Armoured car from Meng for this video, which will airbrush dark grey, which is very similar to Panzer grey used on German tanks of World War II, like the Tiger and Panzer III. So if you're working on one of those, this video will be useful for you guys too. Also, before I start with the build of the kit, don't forget to check the links in the description for all the tools in the video I used. The links are for Amazon, and if you buy following that link, Jeff will allow me to get a small commission off each sale with no additional cost to you. This will help my channel out in getting new kits and make new videos. And so, to the build. If you're new to model making, you'll need some glue. Polycement's the stuff that we use, and I'll be using Ammo's Night Blue, as well as AK's extra thin quick drying cement. The AK quick dry is my favourite and is the same as Tamiya's extra thin quick setting as well. The reason I'm using the blue one is because it works well on camera for you to see. I built the kit in as many subsections as I could to help with the painting. Sometimes following the instructions step by step makes for tricky angles for the airbrush to cover. To remove the ejector pin marks, I used a scalpel to scrape away the defect. I find this the fastest way over using sandpaper, yet still get a smooth finish. These parts I'm assembling now are made from wooden planks on the real thing. So to replicate some damage, I used a very smooth saw from CMK to cut along the plastic part which will be replaced. Next I got some cardstock from Evergreen. This card is made from styrene, which is the same plastic as the kit, so I can use the same polycement glue to attach to the model. To replicate the damage, I cut the end of a piece off and then roughed it up using the very smooth saw. I think the saw did a decent job of making the end look as though the wood had been snapped off and left those loose fibre ends. I used reference pictures to replicate this effect so it will get looking as realistic as possible. You can see all of the reference images I use if you search my Pinterest page, pinterest.com/theinnernerd.yt. The wheels for this colour scheme were a mix of photo etch and plastic parts. To be honest, I didn't fancy this much, so I went and 3D printed some solid disc type wheels instead. I thought this would also allow for some additional weathering opportunity later down the line. If you're interested in making some 3D parts, I use an Anycubic Photon 4K printer and 3D model parts on Autodesk Fusion 360. I'm not sponsored by either, but I've found that these are a good resource for the level I use them for. As with any resin parts, we can't use polycement, so we have to go with superglue. I find this simple Loctite 406 to be very good, although I can recommend VMS, which is a modelling superglue which can come in different thicknesses and drying times. Moving on to the paint now, I want to start by priming the model using Mr. Surfacer 1000 in grey. Viewers of my other videos will notice that I'm not using the black like I usually do. This is because I'm not using my much loved modelling technique for this one, but spraying in one even coat. The reason why will become clearer later in the video. To airbrush the primer, I've thinned it down with Mr. Colour self-levelling thinner and used 12 psi. I don't soak the model with primer but lay it on thinly and evenly. You don't want any wet look on the model at this stage, but more of a satin kind of look as you lay down the primer. I gave the primer until the next day to dry and then filled in any defects with AK's modelling putty. This is a nice putty since it doesn't crack over time and dries fairly hard, so it's good for sanding. I didn't have middle grey for the Arnas scheme, so I did a 50-50 mix of stark sea grey and intermediate blue from AK Real Colours. I added 40% thinner to the overall mix so it flowed nicely through the airbrush. I spray all colours with 10 psi and keep about 5 to 7 cm away from the model. Like with the primer, I'm not soaking the model with paint but laying it on thinly, just enough so the paint shines slightly. The paint's thin so that there isn't any spatter around the spray pattern of the model. If the paint's too thick, the edge of the pattern will be rough. If it's too thin, then the paint will be like a watercolour and appear too transparent. Getting this mixture right is the key to a nice paint finish. If you want to see a video specifically on airbrushing, then let me know in the comments below, and if there's enough interest I'll make a tutorial on all things related to airbrushing like paint types, thinning ratios, different techniques and more. There are a few imperfections on the rear deck, so I scrape these away using the scalpel technique I showed before. To do this correctly you need to keep the blade level and parallel with the plastic, using the edge of the blade to scrape. Any angles introduced here will cause the surface to be uneven when you're done. To mask the wheels I broke out the eyeball remover from a company I can't pronounce. This cuts the circles with ease once you've spent half an hour setting it up, so I cut a set from Tamiya masking tape. I used black 6RP, which is similar to NATO black if you're using Tamiya paints, and coloured the tyres. I'd like to apologise for the footage here as well. I've got a new camera and went fiddling around with the settings and set the aperture too high, so it slowed down the frame rate somehow. I've got that fixed now though, so it won't happen again. Because I like something to stand out on my models, I painted one of the tyres a sand colour which I'd seen on some reference photos. Next I assembled everything into place. I should have left the wheels off at this point because it made it more difficult to get mud into the wheel arches, but I'd already superglued them into place before I realised the mistake. A quick base for the following wood effect using Vallejo tan earths finished this stage. And now it's time for my 3-step weathering process. I start off by bringing the entire model down a notch and blend everything together using a filter. A good colour to choose for this dark grey was Starship Filth from Ammo's oil brusher range. I thinned down the raw oil paint with white spirit. You can use turpentine as well, so that it becomes basically coloured water. I applied that over the whole model using a flat brush from AK. Don't lay this on too thick or there'll be tide marks where the oil has dried later. A small tidy up with a dry cotton bud gets rid of any of those marks if visible. Still in stage 1, I carry on using the oils, but this time adding one colour, dark mud from Ammo's oil brushes. I mixed this with the Starship Filth colour and added a small amount of white spirit to thin them down to a wash consistency. Adding a pin wash with these colours, I picked out the details in the lower section of the model where dirt would have stained and collected. Once this was touched dry around 10 minutes later, I tidied up the areas with the brush dampened with enamel thinner. After that I added more of the dark mud Starship Filth colour, but this time with more of the brown. I also used less thinner in the mix to make the oils thicker to add a serious amount of staining along the lower section of the body. Then returning with thinner on the brush, I agitate the oil so that it blooms and disperses into the surrounding area. This fades the oils and creates a more organic staining look. Be careful not to load the brush with too much thinner here or it'll flood and get rid of the oil completely. You just want enough to push the oil into position. I repeated this process on parts of the model that would receive the most steps and splashes of mud. I also changed the mix of the colours, sometimes bringing in more Starship Filth to balance out the brown of the mud colour. That's the end of part 1 in the 3-step weathering process, so I saved my work and locked in the oils using AK's Ultra Matte Varnish. This is an acrylic based varnish so it won't affect the oils. The matte will also help in the next stages as it's grippier surface than satin or gloss. If you want to know more about varnishes and which type to use, head over to my model making for beginners video where I explain all that good stuff in great detail using Airfix's 172 Spitfire as a base. Bit of a side quest now away from the weathering techniques to create some wood effects. I'm using two colours from Vallejo to create the wooden colour. I mix these live on the model to create a streak-like grain texture, starting with a lighter tone and then adding more of the burnt umber to make the deeper grain details. For such a small area I didn't want to use the complicated chipping fluid process, so I used liquid mask from VMS to mask the area I wanted to keep. Mainly the area at the front has been snapped off as well as a few spots here and there. Once dry I sprayed over the top with a dark grey colour. With everything dry a few minutes later I removed the mask and all the spots I added previously. Okay, step 2 of the weathering process was to add texture. To do this I used AK's dry ground diorama texture paste to create thick mud effect along the bottom of the model. I generally didn't clop it on but added thicker areas around the mud guards where it would have collected from the wheels. Then using similar colours to that of the oil brushes I airbrushed dark mud colour to the texture paste after it had dried. I mottled this on so that some of the lighter colour showed through to create an uneven surface, as though some mud areas were fresh and some were wet and some had dried and gone lighter. Back to the oil brushes I used to make the filter. I added some small details of mud on top of the texture paste and blended with thinner like before. I used a lot more of the Starship filth here to make the mud super dark and mimic the freshest mud. I added streaks in the same way, so the oils are unthinned and I'll actually thin them on the model itself using both a flat brush and step brush. With the brush dampened with thinner I dragged the streak downwards to make the line finer. Working on each side you can manipulate the thickness and direction of the streak quite easily. It's important to keep the brush clean so I wiped it on a clean cloth between strokes. Also too much thinner and it'll make a blotch out of the oil, so keep the brush almost dry and it'll behave itself. Earlier in the video I explained that I didn't paint this model using my normal mottling technique and here's why. I apply the dot filter using the oil brush of colours I'll be using throughout the build in various tones. This creates variants of the same colour. Then with the step brush I drag the oils and blend them in the same way I approach the streaks. Moving from top to bottom and working across the dots they begin to blend into the background colour of the model, leaving behind the faint discolouring. This is a much faster way of making the paint less uniform when compared to the mottling airbrush technique. The final step, step 3 of the weathering process, was to use pigments. These are from VMS and I'm using 3 colours: sand, European brown earth and track brown. Basically a light, medium and dark colour to replicate the varying dryness of mud. The way to apply these is to be very sparing because the pigment is super strong. Something I forgot to do here because the front wheel looked like CSI had been in looking for fingerprints. small detail I added was splashes of mud, so I went back to the oil brushes and thinned them down, which would allow me to spray them off the tip of a brush. I concentrated this effect to areas that would have been sprayed from the wheels. Guns can be brought to life with a base coat of NATO black and then the details picked out with gunmetal pigment to give the raised areas a little shine. I also added some speckles of matte varnish to the headlight lens so they look weathered as well. This makes a nice effect against the gloss parts once it's dry and unifies it against the rest of the model. And with that, the model was complete. Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Inner Nerd and this has been my build of Meng's Royce Armoured car. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It won't cost you anything but give me a lot in return. Don't forget the links in the description for the tools and equipment I used in the video. If you use that link, it won't cost you anything extra, but I'll get a small commission from each sale, which will help the channel. Also, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters who are helping me grow this channel and get new kits. The full HD pictures you're seeing here are available for free over my Patreon page, so head over to patreon.com/theinnernerd to see the full album. Join me in my next video where I'll be building Kinetics F104C, which I'll be completing in full metal finish, as well as doing something I've never ever done on a project before. So subscribe to my channel and watch the YouTube stories to see how that one builds up. Feeling up for some more relaxing videos or want to learn more about modelling? Click on one of the playlists to see my armour and aircraft model builds, and scan the Instagram QR code to go straight to my page there, where I upload every week on the progress of my latest projects.